Haberler.com'dan merhabalar efendim. Ben Esra Öztürk. Bugün yine çok önemli bir konuyu, önemli bir konukla konuşacağız. Afganistan'ı ve Taliban'ı konuşacağız. Çok korkunç görüntüler geldi biliyorsunuz. Havalimanından binlerce insan ülkeden kaçmaya çalışıyordu. Taliban yönetiminden korktukları için. Söz gelimi değil, her röportajımızdan önce önemli bir konuk diyoruz ama neden konuğum önemli onu da izah edeyim. Konuğum Dr. Paul Miller olacak. Amerika Birleşik Devletleri Ulusal Güvenlik Konseyi Afganistan-Pakistan eski direktörü 10 yıl boyunca Amerikan hükümetine gerek orduda gerek istihbarat servisinde gerekse Ulusal Güvenlik Konseyi'nde hizmet vermiş, görev yapmış bir isim. Özellikle de 10 yıl boyunca Amerika'nın dahil olduğu tüm savaşları, müdahaleleri, iç savaşları yakından bildiği için Amerika'nın Afganistan'daki varlığı süresince neler oldu ve bugüne gelindiğinde bir zafiyet mi vardı yoksa gizli bir anlaşma mı vardı? Tartışılan başlıklar var. Bunları kendisine soracağım. Dr. Miller, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you. Do you want to start with making any comments on the unbelievable picture coming from the Hamid Karzai International Airport yesterday? You know, thousands of people were trying to flee the country, and some of them, a lot of them, were hanging on some part of the plane. They were trying to run out of the country in that way, and even though the pilot knew that when they took off they would die, they took off the plane.
The images coming out of Kabul have been gut-wrenching and very difficult to watch for all of us, especially for those who worked, served, and sacrificed and tried to help be a part of the war in Afghanistan for the better. But as hard as it is to watch the images, it's infinitely harder for the people on the ground. And we shouldn't forget that the Afghans now face a bleak future because of the fall of Kabul and really the abandonment of Afghanistan by the international community.
This is already outspoken. This is part of the discussion. So the question is it an operational failure by the world's superpower, United States, during a 20 years operation in Afghanistan? Or do you think there's a secret agreement between Biden administration with Taliban? Because in a very short time, they seized the whole country and the capital and the presidential compounds utterly with no efforts.
Well, there's no secret about the agreement that President Trump signed with the Taliban a year ago that committed the United States to withdraw within, I think, 14 months. And that agreement placed very few demands on the Taliban, very few enforceable demands on the Taliban. So the Taliban knew all they had to do was wait out the clock. President Biden inexplicably decided to abide by that agreement. It's the only policy from the Trump administration that he's kept to. He's repudiated most of President Trump's policies when he came into office. I don't understand why he chose to do that, but he did. And that's what resulted in the scenes we saw unfold last week. Yes, it's a failure. It's a failure by several presidential administrations, but really a failure by the international community, because the war in Afghanistan and the state building effort in Afghanistan was something that the world, that the United Nations was a part of, and dozens of nations were part of the coalition. And so there's blame enough to go around. I think we should all accept our part of responsibility in what's happened this week.
I don't mean Trump's previous agreement signed with Taliban, because it was about withdrawing, but it wasn't about leaving the administration totally to the Taliban. So I'm talking about something else. Why did not Afghan administration or armed forces did not struggle with Taliban? You know, they just left everything behind.
So I don't believe there's any secret agreement at all. And I will also observe that the Afghan army did fight for 10 years. Over 50,000 Afghan soldiers have been killed in action fighting the Taliban over the last 10 years. They collapsed over the last few months, especially last week. And you're right, they didn't fight in the past week. I think each individual Afghan soldier made a very rational decision that they didn't want to fight a losing battle. They didn't want to commit suicide fighting a battle they didn't believe they could win. And they came to that belief because President Biden made a very public announcement that we were leaving, and we were also pulling all of the support we were giving them, in particular our air support. The war in Afghanistan was mostly a war on the ground by Afghan soldiers, backed by American air power. When American air power left, that's when the Afghan army collapsed. They no longer believed they had what they needed to fight and win, and so they saved their lives by going home. And I don't blame them for that after having fought and died for 10 years against our common enemies. It's just very sad to see what's happened.
If you say that there is no secret agreement between the US or the Afghan administration with Taliban, it means that Biden's declaration statements, which he gave a month ago, is a proof of his short-sightedness, right? What do you say? What he was telling yesterday was totally against what he was telling a month ago. So today he was just pushing everything, pushing all the failure on the Afghan forces, claiming that they did not defend their own land. So what do you say?
I agree that the administration has been short-sighted. Frankly, I think that's been a part of sort of how the international community has approached this for the past 10 years. I think we've all been short-sighted. I think President Obama was short-sighted when he adopted a withdrawal deadline. President Trump was short-sighted when he signed the agreement with the Taliban. And yes, President Biden as well, short-sighted in how he pulled out. President Biden said in his speech yesterday that he was surprised by the speed of the Taliban's advance, which that's just an admission right there that he was caught off guard by the events that unfolded. I think that no one was surprised that the Taliban made advances as we withdrew. We all knew that was going to happen, which is why we should not have done it. But the speed of the advance clearly took the administration off guard. You mentioned in the president's address that he blamed the Afghan troops for not fighting. I just want to emphasize again that that is not true. The Afghan soldiers who were allied with the international coalition, they stood and they fought for 10 years, and tens of thousands of them were killed in action against the Taliban. And the president was not telling the truth when he said the Afghans refused to fight.
I want to ask a personal question. As a US citizen, how do you feel while you were watching the footage coming from the US embassy that allegedly all the documents were fired in the embassy because everybody left the building? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's very hard to watch. It is, again, as I served in the army in Afghanistan, and it feels like a betrayal of what we served and fought for, an abandonment of our allies, our Afghan allies who stood shoulder to shoulder with us to fight our common enemies. And it feels as if it has cheapened our sacrifice and our service. And it is very hard to watch, and it's very hard to feel that right now. And I imagine that's a similar feeling, not just for American veterans, but again, veterans from around the world. This was a multinational coalition of countries from around the world who recognized a common enemy in Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, who served together against an enemy of human civilization. And I think we are all collectively mourning the loss of that fight.
Have you heard the documents leaked by the WikiLeaks? Some of them are claiming that some of the documents, instead of killing civilians, instead of killing the fighters of terrorist organization, the troops of United States Army killed some children in Afghanistan. So there are a lot of different documents proving such stuff, which was revealed after the Iraq War.
I'm not familiar with the documents you're referencing. I know that in wartime there are accidental civilian casualties. I also know that the United States of America does not target civilians deliberately. That's a war crime, and if something like that happens, we would hold our people accountable.
So I want to go to the point of failure. So do you think this is also a failure against ex-Soviet, now modern Russian or socialist countries? Because while the United Nations Security Council were having emergency meeting on Afghanistan, it was first China who declared that they recognize the Taliban's government. and then Russia.
Are you asking, has Russia failed in this
No,
situation?
I'm asking that U.S. administration's short-sightedness was a failure, and during these 20 years, what you have done in the country resulted in Taliban's seizure of the city and the country. Does it also mean a failure against ex-Soviet ideology or struggle, let's say?
The international effort in Afghanistan was trying to build a peaceful and stable and free country and incorporate Afghanistan into the liberal international order. Our failure has now given strength to the critics of the international order, chiefly among them Russia and China. We have to ask ourselves every day what kind of world we want to build. And Russia and China have one answer to that question that is hostile to freedom and hostile to not just American interests, but allied interests all around the world. That Russia and China see the fall of Kabul as something to exploit for their gain. It tells you everything you need to know about their vision of the world. They want more of this.
Can you comment on Blackwater's offer, which they made a few years ago to Donald Trump? They were offering a model like Russia's Wagner company in Libya. So you would take back all the troops, and waged soldiers would be positioned in Afghanistan. So it was another formula for reducing the war spending. So it was an alternative, and Trump did not accept that. Do you think now you're taking back all the troops? Do you think this alternative can be spoken again?
No, I recall that offer. Blackwater, I think it was Blackwater,
yeah,
wanted to outsource the war to the private sector.
Yeah.
And use a corporation to pursue America's interests. I don't believe that would be appropriate or effective. I don't see evidence that the private sector knows how to do counterterrorism and peace enforcement better than the United States government or better than the international coalition. So I'm glad that President Trump rejected that offer, and I don't think we should try private sector solutions for these kinds of problems.
Yeah, okay. My last question, I'm asking this question because maybe we can have a deduction. Taliban is not designated as a terrorist list in the United States. So after seeing that several countries one by one started to recognize the Taliban administration, if US sees that the Taliban is different than 20 years ago because they're just giving surprising statements to the media, especially about how in which way they will apply Sharia in the country. So they're just becoming more tolerant on women's issue and such. Do you think that the United States administration leaves the room to recognize Taliban government in the future? I'm asking this because Taliban is not designated as terrorist organization in the Department of State in the U.S.
I don't know if the Biden administration will formally recognize the Taliban government. I am confident that the Taliban have not truly changed. The Taliban are much better than they used to be at media manipulation. They have a very good and effective propaganda machine. So they're telling the world that they've moderated and they will respect women's rights and that they're a new kind of Taliban. You have to understand that they're saying that because they don't want the international scrutiny or isolation, and they would like to keep the international aid flowing if possible. I would encourage all the journalists and your viewers to wait a couple of months. You'll see the Taliban revert to norm and reimpose their brutal tyranny at the same measure they had in the 1990s. I don't believe the Taliban have changed. Despite their rhetoric, despite what they're saying, they're going to be just as totalitarian as they used to be. Most worryingly, they will again provide a safe haven for international terrorists. That's what this war was about in the first place. That's why we had a multinational coalition fighting against our common enemies. And now I believe international terrorists will again find safe haven in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and we are all at greater risk of terrorist attack.
I'm asking you this question because you worked as a military analyst and intelligence analyst for U.S. government and army. What do you think about Turkey's military presence in Afghanistan's Hamid Karzai International Airport? How do you evaluate? How do you see what is going to be in the future? Can there be a problem or a struggle, or do you think we can cooperate with Taliban forces, which are seeming very moderate recently?
Well, again, I hope that the Turkish government does not believe Taliban propaganda, and that would be regrettable if the government made decisions based on that propaganda, which I think is transparently false and misleading. Can Turkey play a positive role here? Perhaps. I'm not a specialist in this, but I am aware that the U.S.-Turkish alliance has been quite strained in recent years. Is there an opportunity for Turkey to play a positive role in Afghanistan when the United States is no longer there? Perhaps, but I do hope, if so, that the Turkish government would choose to pursue our common interests and the interests of the whole alliance and the interests of the international community as a whole. That would be a positive role to play. Speaking out for human rights, speaking out for women's rights, and speaking out for religious minorities, and holding the Taliban government accountable to deny safe haven to terrorists. If the Turkish government can do that, it could play a positive role and could actually help improve the U.S.-Turkish alliance.
Okay. Do you want to have anything to add, which I didn't ask you?
No, thank you for having me on the show.
Dr. Miller, thank you for joining me. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Amerika Birleşik Devletleri Ulusal Güvenlik Konseyi eski Afganistan-Pakistan Direktörü Dr. Paul Miller konuğum oldu. Afganistan ve Taliban konusunu konuştuk. İlişkiler nasıl olacak? Bundan böyle tanıyan ülkeler var. Çin, Rusya bunların başında geldi. Yavaş yavaş ülkelerde Taliban'ın hükümetini tanıyacaklarını açıkladılar. Türkiye Dışişleri Bakanı Mevlüt Çavuşoğlu açıklamaları olumlu bulduğu yönünde bir beyanat vermişti. Paul Miller 10 yıl boyunca görev yaptığı esnada hem Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nin müdahil olduğu savaşları ve iç çatışmaları yakından inceledi. Hem CIA'de analist olarak görev yaptı. Hem de özellikle Afganistan konusunu Bush döneminde ve Obama döneminde yakından çalıştığı için kendisini konuk ettik ve görüşlerini sorduk. Bunun Amerika Birleşik Devletleri için bir zafiyet olduğunu ve bir kayıp olduğunu kabul etti. Bunu hemen hemen tüm Amerikalı yetkililer kabul ediyorlar. Buna yönelik demeçler veriyorlar. Almanya Şansölyesi Angela Merkel de benzer bir demeç verdi. Amerika burada bir zafiyete, başarısızlığa uğradı dedi. Bundan sonra neler olacak? Bununla ilgili görüşlerini almaya çalıştım Dr. Miller'ın, ama Türkiye'nin özellikle Taliban'la ilişkisinde Hamid Karzai Havalimanı'nda bir koruma tesisinin niteliğinde asker bulundurmasına yönelik görüşlerini sordum. Çok da net görüşler belli ettiğini söylemek mümkün değil maalesef, ama Türkiye'nin terörle mücadelede yapacağı hareketler, insan haklarının korunmasına yönelik alacağı aksiyonlar önümüzdeki yıllarda yine ABD-Türkiye ilişkilerinin belirleyici unsurlar olacak dedi. Altını çizdiği bir konu daha var. Amerika başarısız oldu ama Afganlar da başarısız oldu dedi Dr. Miller. Çünkü 10 yıl boyunca çok fazla askerlerini kaybettiler. Bugüne gelindiğinde ise Taliban'a karşı Afganistan'ın hiçbir şey yapmadığını söylemek mümkün değil. Çünkü çok fazla asker kaybettiler, öldürüldüler, sayıları azaldı birliklerinin açıklamasını yaptı. Biden'ın öngörüsüzlüğünü teyit etti. Bir ay önce Biden, Taliban'ın bu şekilde güçlü bir şekilde yeniden ortaya çıkması mümkün değil şeklinde bir demeç vermişti. Dün ise tam aksi yönde bir beyanat vererek Afgan güçleri kendi ülkelerini, kendi topraklarını korumadılar. Biz niye orada kalalım? Biz de askerlerimizi tabii ki geri çekiyoruz açıklamasında bulundu. Altyazılı olarak izlediniz. Teşekkürler. Hoşça kalın.